So welcome everyone. This webinar I think is an absolutely amazing way to get in touch with a lot of people at once. And I think for club coaches to share information, it's absolutely brilliant. So what we'll do tonight is we'll go through this TI presentation just on great club coaches. And this actually comes from the area and division director training. It's not actually for club coach training, but it's the perfect way I think to start a dialogue around some pretty important parts of coaching. If you're wondering what my background is, I've coached 4 clubs. I absolutely love doing it, and I learned a tremendous amount by doing it. So in my Toastmasters experience, it's definitely one of my favorite things to have done and to have accomplished. So the overview of the presentation is, this is all we're going to cover. What needs to be happening in order for a club coach to qualify for the award. As Alexander just pointed out, he's coaching a club, or he's working with a club that has 13 members. So unfortunately, he won't qualify. We'll go through that in just a second, why. But it's still a very rewarding thing to do. Typically, when and why a club coach is needed, which I think all of us probably know already. Then the most important part in most of the presentation is about how to be an effective club coach. So now and then I'll throw in my 2 cents from my experience, and if you can save your questions or send your questions by chat, then we'll cover them all in the last 20 or 25 minutes. So I guess the talents of a club coach is to build the rapport, I think, through good nature and probably by bringing some wisdom into a club. I can tell you right away, when a club is struggling, they love the idea of someone who has some experience coming in and saying, I'm here to help, let me know what we need to do here, and then take over those coaching skills. It's a wonderful way to approach people, and like I said, it works very well. The other talent that a club coach will have is they'll understand how the Distinguished Club Program works, number 1, and they'll be able to tell from the DCP or Distinguished Club Program what's going on with the club. And then once they get in and start chatting with people, they'll get a pretty good understanding of what's going right and what's going wrong, and then how to fix it. The next point about helping the club develop goals, I found that a lot of clubs who were struggling had actually gotten away from the DCP and gotten away from creating goals. And a coach just helps them to get back on track there. And the enthusiasm part, I think that the club for a while is the person who sets the tone for rebuilding or reinvigorating a club. And then I think that enthusiasm spills over into the executive. The most difficult clubs to coach are the ones where the executives don't feel motivated for some reason, or maybe there's no depth in the club. And the clubs that work out the best for club coaching are when there's at least a couple of members who are pretty enthusiastic about getting the club going, and then between the coach and those enthusiastic members, all kinds of good things happen. Now, I think as far as the skill set that you learn, it's a spectacular skill set to develop. Going into a situation where something is a little bit complicated and difficult, and basically by your Toastmasters experience and by your leadership skills, you can create all kinds of incredible change. The most important, I think, personality aspect is to be patient, because usually there's a lot going on that needs to be fixed, and sometimes it takes many weeks or sometimes a few months to get things in order. So patience and good nature are definitely an essential personality aspect for helping a club to get back on its feet. As far as building leadership experience goes, I think there's probably nothing better than being a club coach and diving right into whatever the complications are and helping figure them out. Diplomacy skills, it depends on the situation that you're in. I'd say of the 4 clubs that I coached, they all required something very different in many ways. And what I would recommend for one, I wouldn't necessarily recommend for the other. But definitely a couple of the clubs required some extraordinary diplomacy skills. Usually there's some egos involved that need to be put back in a winning situation or a helpful situation. And the sharing of expertise. I mean, you don't have to know everything about Toastmasters, but the more you know, the more helpful it is. Even to the basics, like what, why we do what we do in a meeting, why there are the different roles and why do we have a word of the week and that kind of thing. Everything in Toastmasters has a purpose, and it's quite brilliant at the different levels. So when you know those purposes, it's quite incredible. So the word of the week, the purpose of the word of the week is, just give you one example, is to keep the various members, A, listening, and B, in the moment or in the present. If they can use that word of the week in the middle of a impromptu session or in a speech, then it's a great way to for them to be very engaged. So that's its purpose. And invest in the future of Toastmasters. So I'd have to say that Toastmasters can be incredibly inspiring, and in very many ways, coaches have to take that inspiration and then transfer it to the club. So it's very important that the Toastmaster understand the inspirational elements of Toastmasters and then pass it on to the different members. Now, the qualification. So like Alexander, the first club that I coached, I didn't actually realize that you had to do anything except start coaching. And it wasn't a club that I got credit for, but that was okay. It was a wonderful experience anyway. But for the club qualification, there has to be fewer than 12 members. That doesn't mean, give up on clubs that are at 13 members, but it just means that you won't get the accreditation for it, but that's okay. And the other thing is a coach can't be a member of the club when they're appointed, which I guess means they could become a member of the club further down the road, but not at the time they start their coaching. So as the top part says, the Toastmaster can't be a member of the struggling club upon appointment. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's the sum total of a club coach qualification, but these are the things that will allow you to get the accredited for it if you're working towards your distinguished Toastmaster. Now, so the club connection. If you've been an area governor or if you visited a lot of clubs, it's pretty easy to get an idea of what's going on in a club without too much observational skills. Very often, they're either following the program or they're not following the program, or there isn't a lot of depth in the club. Maybe it's a lot of new members and the experienced members have left. One thing that's quite frequent in a club coaching situation is the executive members tend to be the same every year and they're kind of exhausted by doing it, but they have no one to pass on those executive duties to. And you can see that they're kind of burned out. So there's a lot of executive burnout that has to be dealt with. As a club coach, as you're diving in there, it's almost not like you're there to coach, but you're there to be part of the whole thing. And that's how you develop a rapport. The club coach is always the example of what they are espousing. If you're asking people to do more speeches, then as a club coach, you have to give speeches at the club too. If you're asking the club to do great evaluations, then you have to work at being the example of great evaluations. One of the clubs that I coached only had 4 members, and so we were all speaking and all evaluating pretty much every meeting, just to have these dynamic meetings with a very few people. And once they see you fully engaged in the supporting of the meetings and supporting of the club, then that's the trust and respect part. They'll definitely respect you for diving into their complicated situation and for helping out. And the last point here is to use the club coach troubleshooting guide. So I don't know if you've seen it. Let me just tab to it. That's it there. So if you haven't seen it or you're not sure where to get it, I'll have my email address at the end. I'll just send it to you. But I found this very helpful in trying to understand what's going on with the club and using it to figure out maybe different points of action that you could take to help the club out. we can look at that a little bit later if you like. Second part of making the club connection, I'll start with emphasizing teamwork. The most important thing, again, for a club is to create continuity from one year to the next. So if you go in as a coach and you fix a club or you help fix a club, but it immediately falls apart after you leave, that's no good. So part of the trick of being a coach is to help as many people as possible build depth in their experience and to take ownership of helping the club out in any way that they can. And that's where that sense of ownership comes from. I think where I've been successful here is helping people realize just what an incredible learning environment a Toastmasters club is, and that they have the opportunity to help build this this experience for others and for themselves. And usually you get a lot of buy-in from that. The other thing is there's a lot of commitment on the part of the coach. They need to know that you're there for them as often as possible. So I'll give you a quick tip here. If you know that you're going into a difficult club or the club that will be difficult to fix, there's nothing that says that you can't have two coaches. So if you have two coaches going into a slightly complicated club, it's a lot easier to share the time and share some of the dedication around the doing of it. And one of the clubs I had the opportunity to coach, I did this way, and it worked out absolutely beautifully. So it's something to think about if that's a situation that you're in. And one thing that's a wonderful opportunity is for clubs that are having a bit of difficulty for them to visit other clubs that are successful and to ask questions and figure out what these other clubs are doing to help them on be successful. And of course, everything we do in Toastmasters gets evaluated somehow. And so to identify the strengths and challenges in a club is similar to identifying the strengths and challenges in a good evaluation. The strengths are to help build them up, and identifying the challenges or the opportunity areas are ways to figure out how to plan and create changes in the more complicated parts. Now, one of the complications around teaching a club how to plan is that you have to be a good planner yourself. And I think an important point here is that as you dive into all this, you won't know how to do everything, and you won't necessarily be great at everything yourself. But this is a great opportunity to recognize if the club needs something and you're not quite sure how to do it, you can invite other people in to help, other people from the district or the area to help out, to help explain how to do something. Or pretty much all the educationals for these type of things, like how to create a plan for the whole year, have been written. And you can email me and ask me, and I can point you in the right direction if you're trying to figure out something that isn't a strength for you just yet. The Club Leadership Handbook, I think, is pretty good. It's, there's some good tips in it. It's a lot of extra reading. I think the most important thing about the Vice President of Education is that they do the training at the TLIs, and they'll pick up most of what they need to know, hopefully, there. They'll also meet other VP Eds, and I think that networking is also a pretty valuable thing to do. And there are a ton of tools for creating great Toastmasters clubs on the internet. A couple of them I'll show you at the end of this, but if you're trying to figure something out, there's a good chance someone has already figured it out. So again, take advantage of firing me off an email, or and at least I can help point you in a direction if you're trying to figure something out. Quality clubs. So this comes up quite a bit in coaching. There's a lot of clubs who want to have an open house to solve their problems, but I can tell you right away that until there are quality meetings, it's very difficult, A, to get guests to become members, and an open house won't help solve this. If you have an open house and get a few guests there, and they come back a week or two later and the meetings aren't good, then they won't stick around. So again, it's not just to get people in through the door. It's about once they get in through the door, they're seeing a great quality meeting. And it is possible to have a quality meeting even with just a few people. There's techniques for doing it. And again, if that's something you're struggling with, then get in touch with me and I'll give you some tips on how to work through a meeting with very few people. Everything that we do in Toastmasters is around this altruistic teaching of everybody else, and that's what the clubs are all about. It's everybody there to support everybody else. And so as a coach, it's something that you keep reminding people of, and I think a lot of people, they certainly like that type of interaction. It's totally a unique learning environment in my experience, and so being able to infuse that in a club, everybody's there for everybody else, is a wonderful thing. And that's why you have to have very motivating evaluations, because that's part of that servant leadership and respect and supporting of others. The TI recommends doing the moment of truth educational. I've actually never done it, so I'm not entirely sure what's in there, but if it's something that you're interested in, definitely dive in. What I would say for this point is that a quality club has an education program, and that's probably the most important thing. Where a quality club would do an educational at least once a month around something that the membership is struggling to learn about. Maybe it's about writing great speeches when you have a couple of newer members. Definitely Evaluate to Motivate is part of an important educational program that should be given with some frequency. And maybe it's just something about being calm and relaxing in front of a group, doing an educational on that. So educationals are great for helping with member retention and making people feel as they're coming out of the meeting that they really learned something. And it's a great way to help build and develop a club. Now, so membership, it takes 20 members to support a club. If you're starting with a club that has fewer than 12 members, let's say 8 members or 7 members or 6, I would recommend that it's quite difficult to go from 6 to 20 in 1 year, and that a reasonable goal may be to get 8 new members, and it may take more than a year to coach that club. 2 of the clubs I coached took 2 years to bring back to 20 plus members, but those clubs, the 2 years, the time was very well spent, and it created a lot of depth in the club. And both of those clubs are doing very well now. So sometimes the extra time is very helpful. So getting back to 20 members quickly doesn't necessarily help, but getting to 20 members and creating depth at the same time is really the right thing to do. You want to create depth in the executive team, which means they need to go and do the training. And if you're working with the club where the executive members are a little bit difficult and they don't feel like going to the TLI training, then it's important to get someone into the club to train them. And usually that does it. Many area governors are qualified enough to go and do the training. And certainly when I was, or area director, certainly when I was the area director, that's something that I made sure that any problematic club got the training, even if they were reluctant. And I love this third point here, that every member is responsible for keeping all the other members satisfied and involved in the club. And that's a great thing to remind clubs where there's conflicts of ego or difficulty in how complications in how things are run. It's just a reminder that everybody's there to help everybody else, and that's the way it works best. A lot of clubs that are struggling have no idea about the recognition part of the program, and it's a pretty important thing to do to, make it fun to celebrate a member's achievement. And it's even easier in the Pathways program because the achievements happen more frequently. The first achievement level is, the end of level 1 is 3 projects, which is about 5 different things. But it's a lot easier to get than the old 10 speeches full CC. So if you're coaching a club, really celebrate any of those achievements. And I don't know, it may seem like not a big thing, but I think the members really like the fact that they're being recognized, especially people who are quite shy about the whole thing. Looking into the future, I think as you start to get a club back on track, then it's time to talk about what type of club the members would really like to develop. I think they're trying to first survive, and then once they realize that they are going to survive, then realize that they can actually make something great. So that's a wonderful aspect that a club coach will bring in, is to sit down with a club and do the annual planning with them, and to, as part of the discussion, talk about the vision for what they want the club to be. And like I said before, if they're uncertain, it's easy enough to take an executive or two into a great club and see how it's run, and that'll certainly clarify things. One thing that we've done successfully in the past too is we've created sister clubs around one weak club and one strong club. And it's a wonderful way to exchange information. And every now and then, members from the strong club want to give a speech somewhere else, and it's a great way for them to be able to go to a sister club to give a speech. So it works out quite nicely. The club mission, I think that's the next slide, so I'll get there. Yeah, guide the club to set specific goals. All the goals are built around the Distinguished Club Program. So I think the most important thing is to let clubs know what's so important about the Distinguished Club Program. A lot of clubs who have gotten off the path and are struggling have kind of given up on the Distinguished Club Program, or they don't even know the value of the thing. But the Distinguished Club Program is definitely the way to create a well-rounded club, because it's about getting new members, which adds this fresh life to the club. It's about training executive members, which adds depth to the club. And it's about people giving speeches, that's what they're there for, to get over a nerve. So when all those things are happening, you do quite well on the DCP, and you get this well-rounded club in return. So there's the mission statement there. There are even clubs that I've been to that read this thing out every single meeting. And whether you do that or not, it is a good thing to keep reminding people of, that this is what the club is all about, and this is what it is that we're here for and what we're trying to do. When I look at this statement, one thing that occurs to me is that it's important to keep standards within the club, even as it's struggling and regrowing. There are certain things that it's probably better to not talk about. It's different in an advanced club, but in a club that's struggling and regrowing, can be a lot of sensitivities in the room, and you try not to offend anyone. So talking about things like politics, or using any derogatory terms or words can become complicated. So part of the club mission is to set a standard that everybody can rise to. If you have any questions about that, we can handle that in a sec. Okay, and now the Club Success Plan, or the DCP program. I think that it takes a while for a club to meet all 10 goals, but it is good to have a plan to get there. Maybe it'll take a couple of years, or maybe it'll take even longer than that. But it's great to be able to get a club into the distinguished group or into the select distinguished group, especially if it's been struggling for a few years. Just to be able to achieve that, it can be a pretty extraordinary change. As far as establishing any additional goals, there are all kinds of other possibilities, but what I'd recommend here is, as a successful coach, don't try to do 10 things. Don't try to do everything. Just try to do 3 or 4 things really well. Make those the top priority things, and that's the thing that'll create a difference. If you try to do too much, you'll just burn yourself out and people can't absorb it anyway. But if you're really focused on the 3 or 4 essentials, then you can create amazing change there before you get into anything a little more complicated. The whole goal is to create this incremental growth and change. So everything doesn't have to happen right away. And sometimes it can take months or a year or two. And finally, resources for accomplishing goals. So there are resources out there. I have a calendar that anybody's more than welcome to for planning. If you've ever heard me speak, you probably heard me speak about it already. All right, so let's do some Q&A because that's a lot of information. So I'll unmute you guys. You can ask me either by sending me a chat message or just unmute yourself and ask a question. Like I said, there was a lot of info in there. Let's see if I can just do it this way. There you go. So there are all the slides. If you have any questions, fire away.
Scott, it's Jim.
Hey, Jim.
I did have just a comment, not so much a question, reference the moments of truth you talked about.
Yeah.
The area visits, the guideline and paperwork that is used for that is built on the moments of truth. The moments of truth is a phenomenal tool for providing a snapshot of where a club is at any given time. So our recommendation in particular for a coach is if the club has not done moments of truth recently, to walk through that so that the club gets a bit of an understanding of what they're doing well, some of the key areas they need to pay attention to, so that, as you said, the efforts that they put forward are on the most important things at the very beginning. Okay.
So do we agree then that a great club coach would know how to give the moments of truth educational? They would probably know how to give the evaluate to motivate educational. I don't know, then maybe anything beyond that is bonus. They definitely want to be good at giving an educational on planning as well.
I would say in particular, because the moments of truth is more of a facilitation than an educational or presentation.
Okay.
That not everybody is a strong facilitator. Some of those skills are a little bit unique rather than the educational side. I think that a strong coach should be familiar with it, should be able to explore it and understand the importance of it. And if you're not comfortable in presenting it, then find people that are.
Okay. Okay. That's funny. I haven't heard it very often. I think I heard Harry Kingston give it once, and I don't recall it any other time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe one of those great tools that is overlooked. Raymond, have you ever given the moments of truth?
Not really. Well, sort of, but not officially. And this is something I'm going to talk about in my presentation later on in French. I think a good coach has to be better with his or her question than with the answers.
Okay. Yeah.
Because nowadays people don't take action only on information.
Yeah.
So you need to be good with your questions.
Yeah.
And the moment of truth can be a good, useful tool to help you ask good questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a great point, because as a coach, if you do everything, then you're not building any depth.
No.
But if you're helping them to figure out how to do all these things, then all the good depth starts to happen. So
you need to work on their beliefs.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just reading a question from Alexander. Just interested in what you share with others when you have a feeling that ailing clubs needs help, or when membership is dwindling. Let me show you. I'll just show you this other document. This is the document that I used as a club coach. And what I did in the document was I tried to figure out everything that needed to happen in order for the club to become strong again. And it didn't mean that everything had to happen on this list, but the highest priority things typically did. So let me show you this part here. Looking after your guests. So this may seem a little bit crazy, but it's almost bizarre how many week clubs you go into where members don't even talk to the guests when they come in. So they're not creating any kind of a connection or they're not asking the guests what they're there for. And it's not bad to sit around as an executive in a club that's rebuilding and saying, okay, how are we going to best look after people who come in to visit? Because if you can impress the guest, then chances are they'll come back. If you offend the guest, then chances are you'll never see them again. And there's all kinds of different ways to create connections. And the easiest way is to ask them what they're doing there. What did you come to Toastmasters for? What is it that you're hoping to learn? And all kinds of things come out. There are lots of people who have to give a speech at a wedding. There are people who have to get up in front of a group at work for the first time. There's all kinds of things. So once you connect on that level, then all kinds of good things can happen. And the more experienced members will maybe help mentor that guest when they become a new member. The other thing I did was, in order to create a strong growing membership as opposed to a dwindling membership, is you really have to have an education program. If people are coming and they're giving up a Wednesday night or a Thursday night or whatever to go to Toastmasters, if they're getting an educational every month or so, it's an incredible way to learn and grow. And even if they're having trouble participating, they're learning and growing and building their skills, and the chance of membership retention is a lot higher. If you're not doing that, or there's no mentorship program, it's a lot easier for people to just leave and not come back. And I'll mention two types of clubs that struggle in particular. One are clubs that meet every 2 weeks, because even if people join, if they miss one meeting, they miss a whole month of Toastmasters. And for people who are a little reluctant to get involved, missing a month is a long time. So the other thing I did in this checklist was the whole thing for me was to build a lot around the Evaluate to Motivate program and to train as many people as possible in motivational evaluations. So that's why I like seeing that Pathways has got people doing evaluations really early on. It's such a cool way to do it. But another possibility is if you're in a struggling club and there's only 3 or 4 or 5, 6 people, you can do a group evaluation with one lead evaluator, or a roundtable evaluation, where everybody speaks for 30 seconds or 45 seconds just to give a point or two. And it's a great way to do it. Creativity Plus does that. And it was just a great way to develop everybody as an evaluator within the group. But anyway, it's these type of things that create that kind of learning and interaction every time that keeps members coming back, and then you can build on a base. Alexander does Moments of Truth as a table topic. So that's a good idea. I definitely feel that I'm missing something in my training. I'm going to have to read about it. Sylvana's saying, can you send this doc? Yeah, so what I'll do is anybody who emails me, I can send them the documents. I'll show you my email just before we leave, but yeah, so there's the 2 documents here. I think this checklist is really helpful. And again, like I said, you don't have to do everything in it, but it gives you some ideas of the different areas you have to work on and how you can get there. And one of these other ones was creating the right executive mindset. Very often a club will fall apart when there's a very strong personality who's very demanding and nobody else is interested in working with them. And we've seen that a couple of times. You can go from a club of 20 plus members to a struggling club in a very short period of time when the executive members don't understand that they're there to help each other and to help everybody in the room. Every now and then you'll get someone who wants to do things a totally different way, or is demanding on the way that it should be done. So one suggestion is, do not reinvent Toastmasters. It doesn't make any sense. Toastmasters is quite ingenious on almost every level, so it'll help you a lot more to figure out all those rich different levels to the thing and how it helps, rather than just to dismiss it or to move away from it. Again, what I've seen on occasion is that a strong VP Ed will decide he doesn't want to do the DCP program, or a strong personality, I mean, which kind of undoes everything all at once. And usually those guys need a little bit of an understanding of what the DCP program really is. It's odd. In the 2 clubs that I've coached, that happened, or the 4 clubs, that happened twice. Anybody else have questions? So there's my email address. If you email me, I'll send you those two files. And of course, if you have any other questions that you think of later, then by all means, just send me an email and I'll give you as much help as I can. Like I said, I really enjoyed the art of club coaching, and I really enjoyed what I learned from it. And I think that you will too. There's all kinds of ways to outsmart difficulties and problems. And one of the ways is to bounce ideas off of other people who have gone through it before. So I'm always a resource for doing that.